We decided to get a vehicle to sleep in while camping. It's not an RV, it's not a Sprinter van, and it is not a camper trailer.
We wanted to go on longer trips, but without all the costs from hotels and something more comfortable than tent camping.
As nice as a Sprinter van would have been for space, it's much more expensive whether you buy it or do a build out. It's just a lot more. And both of us work at a job, we don't work remotely, so although we wanted to take longer trips, we couldn't be gone for, months at a time, so we weren't really looking for something that we could live in, just something, like she said, for extended trips. And then as for pulling a camper trailer, having done that in the past, it just kind of makes things more difficult.
Yeah, it's not very fun.
Than it needs to. It is nice to have the space, but then you still have a lot of setup at each site you get to. It's definitely more comfortable than a tent, but we wanted something that was self-contained, but cheaper than a Sprinter van or let alone a full-size RV. So what we decided to go with was a 2012 Toyota RAV4 and doing a slight build out on the inside to make it more suitable for camping. From past experience, Toyotas are incredibly reliable vehicles, which is definitely something we wanted with this. Although the more outdoorsy vehicles for Toyota are something like a 4Runner or a Tacoma, they're more expensive and the RAV4 gets better gas mileage than both of those. So that's the reason we ended up going with that. As for a 2012, it's the last model where they put the spare tire on the back. So it's nice not only to have a full-size spare tire as opposed to a smaller, more temporary spare, but also then that gives you a whole lot more trunk space on the inside. So we thought overall, it was a really good vehicle choice that kind of hit a lot of nice points, and we've really liked it from the usage that we've got from it so far. So all we really did on the front end was install this bull bar. It gives it a little bit more protection in the case of like a rear-ending incident or an animal collision, but honestly we also just liked the look of it and it wasn't too expensive, so that's why we decided to throw that on. It also needed new tires not too long after we got it, so we decided to get a more off-roading type tire. We thought it would be beneficial for in national parks driving on potentially dirt or muddy roads, and it definitely paid off in a few national parks. I don't want to spoil any of the videos that are coming out, but there were a couple in California. We're definitely glad we had these. Since we ended up going with a mid-size SUV instead of a full-size RV or camper van, we definitely needed to maximize on space, so we decided to get this 18 cubic foot hard shell storage carrier, and it provided much needed storage that we could not have done the trip without. So the lock has gotten a little bit sticky since using it, but it's nice because you can open it from both sides, and it has a ton of room in here. It's not 100% waterproof, but we did drive it through a couple rainstorms and really only got a little bit of water up at the front here. So we kind of put our more hiking type gear up there and the tent, like things that are supposed to get wet, and we put our clothes towards the back and had zero issues with it at all. We mounted a 2-gallon Rotopack on each side to have extra fuel. We figured we probably wouldn't need it, but driving in remote areas for days on end, you never know when you're not gonna see a gas station, and we figured it's one of those things we would rather have and not need than need and not have. And they definitely ended up not being like an emergency thing that we needed, but it still kind of gave peace of mind in a lot of areas, and it gives us more flexibility for future trips as well. As for the brackets themselves, they did have to be custom built. We ended up going with the lock packs, which get a little bit stuck sometimes, but again, it was just an extra 20 bucks to have the lock on there. And for as much as gas is these days, you definitely don't want anyone walking off with that. So, like I said, the bracket that's on there did have to be custom built. The only vehicle side mount that they sell is for a different type of roof rack than this, so it wasn't gonna work. So what we ended up doing was getting some clamps on Amazon. They're not a perfect fit, but I put a little bit of rubber in there and tightened it down, and it held really well for every place we've taken the RAV. There's a suction cup back under here, for something to kind of grip onto the RAV a little bit better, but also just so it rests on the window better than a piece of steel. The plate itself is a piece of 1/8 inch Core-10 steel, which I just got from work. If you wanted to get some to build yourself, you could get it at maybe a hardware store or a scrapyard, something like that. But I just drilled a couple holes up here so it could attach to the brackets, one down here for the suction cup, and then obviously 4 for the Rotopack mount itself. These were really solid, it worked really well. It didn't rest perfectly on the bracket, so I just used a couple extra nuts between the mount and the plate, and it stayed on there really well. I mean, it's really solid. even with the tanks full of gas, it's worked really well. I'm happy with how it turned out. And I mean, the reason it's on the side right here where it is was just to maximize overall space on the RAV. Again, it's a smaller vehicle. We thought about putting the fuel in like a luggage carrier type thing on the back, but the RAV doesn't actually have a trailer hitch. So that would have been expensive to install. And we kind of figured that would get in the way of the back door more than it would be a benefit to us. So like I said, overall, we're really happy with how this turned out.
The last detail on the outside is all our stickers on the back.
And spoiler alert, since this video is coming out after we visited all of these parks, but before the videos for those parks come out, don't look too closely at it. We started by removing the back seats for more space, which was a lot more difficult than it needed to be, even with a YouTube tutorial video. After that, we built a wood frame for the bed, which we'll look at in more detail in a little bit, but we'll start with the bed.
I made the bed out of 2 4-inch thick pieces of foam. I essentially made a giant pillowcase and stuffed them into it, and it's worked out pretty well.
It was much more comfortable than sleeping on the ground in a tent. The bed is a little bit too long to lay flat when the seats are in their normal position, but come bedtime, all you have to do is slide them and lean them forward, and then the bed folds the rest of the way down.
So as you can see, there's not a ton of headroom in here, but sacrifices had to be made for storage underneath, and it really wasn't much of an issue when we were using it. And as for privacy while we were sleeping, I made some window covers out of Reflectix, and I wrapped them in fabric for a nice little homey touch, and they worked pretty well overall. It was kind of difficult to make them fit the shape of the window to stay in, but it worked pretty well. And then for another homey touch, we added some fairy lights, because when all the window covers are in, it gets really dark in here, and so the fairy lights added a nice subtle light for us.
So here's a better look at the wood frame underneath the bed. It's made with 4 removable plywood panels to access storage underneath, which was admittedly a little bit harder to get to with the mattress on top. Most of them still worked out fine, but the one in the middle pretty much didn't get used the whole trip. Once you got the bed on top there, it wasn't really as easy to pick it up and down, but overall the storage was pretty accessible and we're pleased with the design. So on this side, we have a 6-gallon jug of water, used primarily for cooking and drinking. We've got it in this tub since on our test run, it leaked a little bit, not a whole lot, but enough that we didn't want it in there with the wood frame. And with this thing, it kept all the water inside. We didn't have any problems with leaking or water getting anywhere that it wasn't supposed to. On this side, we've got an electric cooler that we got off Amazon that overall worked pretty well. We definitely didn't have room for a mini fridge or anything like that to keep food cold. And we've had lots of trips where you're fighting with a cooler the whole trip, you get ice melt and it gets the food wet, and even with all the different methods you can use, it's still never the best. So we decided to give this a try. And like I said, it worked pretty well. The one downside is it does run off the car's power. So when the car is not running, it's not running. So we had a couple instances, primarily in the American Southwest, such as Utah, Arizona, where it got a little bit warm overnight and we did have to toss some food, but it kept food pretty chill. We put ice packs in there to kind of bring it down to a temperature and help keep it a little bit lower. So we want to do something with it, maybe adding another battery back here so it can run overnight and keep food cold longer. But overall, we like this better than your standard cooler experience. So this middle panel was definitely very difficult to access with the mattress on top. So we only put things in there that we didn't think we would need to get to very frequently. And one of those things was an emergency jump starter that we did need to use one time. We're very thankful that we had it. We didn't need to use it outside of that, but we would highly recommend that on any sort of long-term road trip. So the back here is also kind of our kitchen area. We have this table here. We just picked it up at Walmart. We built the wood frame with the size of the table in mind, so it fits in there really nice and doesn't move at all during transport. We didn't have any issues with noise or moving around. We ended up not using this maybe as much as we thought we would, because most of the campsites at national parks had picnic tables at them. But for the ones that didn't, we were glad we had it, and for future boondocking type stuff where there will be no provisions, it's really good for both cooking and eating. Underneath that, we have a tote with our cooking utensils, such as pots, pans, dishes, that sort of thing. And then a Coleman 2-burner propane stove. On the other side, it's not in there right now, but we have a tote where we could store our food securely. We didn't have a ton of space in there, so we did have to go to the store every few days. That's maybe something we would change in the future, is just having more room for that. but overall it worked out pretty well on the first go around. As far as airflow in the vehicle goes while you're sleeping, that was definitely the biggest issue we ran into. We've used this camper fan in the past. It's rechargeable, so whether that be while the car is running or from a portable charger, that has worked really well while we've used it. But that was also in larger areas such as a tent or a camper where there's more room for air to exchange. It got a little bit stuffy in the RAV.
Yeah.
We also had these window screens that slide nicely over the rear windows. The problem with those is when you store all your food in your vehicle and you're in bear country, you're trying to contain as much of that scent as you can since you don't want to have food in your tent while you're camping. Same thing here. So while we were in the Southwest, we used those for a little bit more airflow. While we were more in California and Montana in the mountains, we didn't really want to use those and it was pretty hot all around. So that's something we'll explore more options in the future. We even ran the AC before bed to hope that that would bring the temperature down, but we had lots of mornings where we opened the doors and it was warmer in the vehicle than it was outside. So there were a couple nights where like, we can't do this. I think in Utah, we're like, we have to get a hotel. Obviously that's not the goal with this. We only ran into that problem a couple times, but that is one thing to consider if you're doing this yourself, to explore some sort of future cooling option, because that's definitely something we'll be looking into before our next trip as well.
It was really nice to be able to travel with like a mini home and you just roll up to the campsite and you crawl into the back and you get to go to bed.
No setup required once you get to the campsite. Not having to worry about driving with a trailer, whether it be for gas mileage or wind. And then the self-contained unit just fits really nicely into some tighter areas and campsites and national parks. All things considered, we're really happy with how this turned out. We had the main issue with the airflow. It definitely got a little bit hot some nights. That's the main thing we'll look to correct before we take future trips with this, but outside of that, we're really happy with how it turned out. One thing we did have problems with was when we were looking to do this, we were looking for resources online and couldn't really find a whole lot. Most of them were for like camper van conversions, not a whole lot for smaller SUVs like this. So we really hope if this is something you're doing, it's a resource that can be helpful for you as well. If you're considering whether or not this is something you want to do, we would definitely say go for it. We're happy that we did. If you have any questions or want us to expand on areas that we talked about a little bit, but maybe didn't cover a whole lot, be sure to leave them in the comments below and we would love to help any way that we can.